Marna Davis-Wiese. Today's imprint is about women. Women grappling with family and money problems, work, worries about children, loneliness. These women we're talking about today, though, have one more obstacle. They come from other countries, sometimes leaving children and family behind, sometimes new to the language, at times not even speaking English at all. The struggles of Latina women. Meet Dr. Ana Leon from the UCF School of Social Work. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
Immigration is something that everybody's talking about, but in reality, yes, this is Latina women, but in reality, we are a country of immigrants. Our grandfathers, great-grandfathers, grandmothers came from somewhere else. So in reality, some of these struggles are similar. However, why I'm so glad we have a half hour, some are unique to Latin women. What do you think is the #1 misconception? The #1 thing that people don't understand, the image of the Latin mother, the Hispanic mother, the strong matriarch, but it's very stressful. Do you think that's one of the things that people don't understand?
I think that there are several things, but probably the most important thing that comes to mind is that many folks do not understand what they perceive as a lack of involvement on the mother's part is actually the mother feeling very overloaded, very stressed out, being unfamiliar with the culture, unfamiliar with the systems that she has to negotiate. So oftentimes people have a misconception that Latina mothers are not as involved with their children, especially in school matters, and that perhaps they don't care. And I think that, again, it really goes back to all of the issues that they're struggling with, and they're trying to make sense of this new culture and this new society and trying to maneuver and negotiate their children through it, which is a real big task.
So many ways, everything that they believed in, everything their life was built on is gone, is crumbling, is falling apart, and they're trying to hang on to it, aren't they?
Absolutely, and I think that, you know, it's really a situation where we have to think of it this way. If we were placed into a totally different culture and we had to negotiate systems and live day to day and do the kinds of things that we all do every day that we take for granted in a culture that we're comfortable with, that's basically the experience that they're having. It's negotiating language, it's negotiating people and values, differences in values, differences in expectations in a new culture, even logistical issues as to what systems are there to help and how do you get access to them. All of that is very new for them.
I was speaking to a friend who came here from Cuba many years ago, and she said part of the problem is, especially with her kids being involved in school, she said, I didn't feel comfortable going to the PTA. Would they think I talked funny? Did they think I dressed funny? And she was almost too shy or too embarrassed to go.
Right. There is a feeling when you enter any new culture, and you're absolutely right that this is not new to Americans because we are a country of immigrants. And I think that what happens is that every culture and every group that goes through it brings with it all of its uniqueness, and that makes it different. So for Latina women, it does mean that they are concerned about how they're going to be perceived, that they are concerned about how they fit in. Language is very important. A lot of them either do not speak the language or speak with an accent and feel very different. It's a matter of feeling different, a matter of feeling like you're not quite assimilated and you're not quite belonging to that culture.
And things are different here. In the paper that we're talking about today, in your paper about women and migration, you had mentioned that in Latin American countries, in Hispanic countries, there is such an emphasis on la familia, todo para familia. You know, I heard that a lot when I was growing, everything for the family. When here in the US of A, it's a focus on the individual and the pulling away from the family.
Absolutely.
And that must be the hardest push and tug and pull that these women have to deal with.
It is. It's major when you think about it. With Latino women, they have been socialized to do everything around that family, so that the children are then socialized into believing that the family is the most important thing. So your individual choices are made around the family values and family choices. You do not, as a child in that kind of a family, strive for individualism. That is one of the biggest differences between Latino cultures and the American culture. Our children in schools, in American school systems, are taught to be self-sufficient, independent individuals that separate very easily from their families when the time comes for the child to go off to college or go off and get his or her own apartment.
You kind of work towards that.
Yes.
The whole life. The minute they're
goal.
bored, you think, oh, they're going to leave in 17 years.
Well, in the Latino culture, there's a sense that you are not socialized the same way, that you really are taught that the family continues to be your main framework. That's your point of reference. So everything you do around the family. You think about your individual choices and how they're going to affect your family, you know, the respect for the family. So it's really very challenging for kids, especially in adolescents, who come to our culture and they find that their peers are doing things that are very different and that they're separating in different ways and that they can make individual choices and not be as concerned about the family and how the family is going to react to those choices.
And in Hispanic families, it's not just mom, dad, and siblings. It's the extended family. Right. The second and third cousins and people that used to be married and in the family are still part of it as well.
It's grandparents, it's cousins, it's aunts, it's uncles, and sometimes, as you know, it's also other members of the community that are taken in that are not officially family members, but they've been around and they kind of grow up with you, so they kind of become unofficially adopted by the family.
I'm one of those unofficial adoptees of a family, my girlfriend and her husband from Puerto Rico. I know just what you mean, and you feel like you're part of it. Right. Now, it all sounds like it's a good thing, and it's a wonderful thing, but it doesn't mesh with the new culture, and sometimes there are tugs.
It doesn't mesh with the new culture, and I think it has major implications for kids, especially in adolescence, because if you are feeling the pull, if you're straddling two cultures, then your energies are really devoted to trying to negotiate both cultures. And it's really a lot to take in and to try to negotiate and make sense of. So it doesn't fit in with the culture as well because there are certain expectations. For example, in our culture, we know that parenting does not mean that you're allowed to discipline your children physically. And yet in some of the Latino cultures, it's pretty common to kind of take a little swat at a kid, and maybe more than a little swat, because that's been the socialization of that culture. So even learning things about what's accepted here and what's appropriate in this culture is going to be something that both the family, the Latina mother, as well as the children are going to struggle with.
You and I have talked about this before with their teenage daughters, and the real strongholds and the discipline and the chaperoning situation that is expected and has been around for generations. And then they're in the United States and they don't want their friends to see that they have a chaperone. And that must be, you remember this being a situation in your own life.
Absolutely. I mean, I can tell you that I was chaperoned through the time that I was 21. I was married at 21. I married the third man.
The first guy that didn't mind?
That's right. Okay. Actually. And I actually married the third man that I dated. And the first man, my parents didn't even know I was dating. Because the whole philosophy in my family, which is true, and it's based in values of Latino families, is that if you do all that dating, then who's going to want you in the end? Because somehow it connotes that you're going outside of the value system of being more of a pure type of female, and that you're in waiting for that magical moment when you're going to find Mr. Right and going to marry that person. And I ended up being chaperoned, marrying the third person that I dated. It's worked out for me. I've been married to him for 30 years, but I think that luck and a few other things along the way had more to do with that.
Is he a Hispanic background?
Yes, he is.
So he understood.
He understood, but he's very non-traditional. He is not a traditional Puerto Rican man. For example, he is a better cook than I am.
My husband's better than I am too.
He will clean the house. He will fix the bed. You know, he will do a lot of the things that traditionally Latino men have not seen as part of their domain and part of their responsibility.
So were you chaperoned when you dated him?
half the time, and half the other time
they didn't know about.
No, we were very creative.
So how did he?
And we can say it now.
So he was in love. He understood, and he did you ever ask him what was that like when I said when you said I could go, but who came? Abuela, grandmother, mother?
It really would depend. It was sometimes we always had like an older second cousin living who was an adult already, and maybe like in his late 20s, or early 30s. No, it wasn't as bad. So, but I think that my husband knew pretty much what the culture was. He came from a similar culture, even though it was different in some ways. And that's a point that I want to make, is that one of the other misconceptions that I think we have in our society is that when we think of Latinos and Latino women, we think that they're all the same. And they're not. We come from different subcultures, and there are differences in the dialect, there are differences in the food, but there are also differences in what we do, whether it's tied into religion or customs. There are some slight variations in that. But there are also geographical differences. For example, my mother's upbringing on the island of Puerto Rico was very different than my upbringing in New York City. There are differences in terms of age, you know, and lots of differences in terms of socioeconomic classes. So I think that one of the things that people do is that they kind of clump all Latinos together and think that you can kind of help them all in the same way. And you have to take those considerations into account. And I can tell you a story of when I was practicing in a mental health center in New York City. I did a women's group for Latina women, and I had women that were from Cuba, from the Dominican Republic, and from Puerto Rico.
They don't necessarily like each other.
No, they don't. There are references to oil and vinegar, as a matter of fact, when you think about Puerto Ricans and Cubans and Dominicans. I mean, there really are some feelings there. And with this group, the mothers were older than I was. I was all of, I think, 22 at the time, fresh out of graduate school. And I was a real feminist because I think that my mother was very traditional, but she had a feminist streak that she kept kind of undercover and let her girls know about it. And I think we just internalized that. So when I did this group, I was 22. I was a feminist, fresh out of school. I thought I was going to save the world.
And here they were.
And here they were, women in their 30s and 40s, very traditional. And I'll never forget that there was one session where one of the women was telling me and telling the group how she had to have food on the table at 5 o'clock for her husband, and she had to iron his underpants. Otherwise, she would be in trouble. And I remember as a 22-year-old wanting to scream out and say, what are you talking about? You know, what would possess you to do this? And fortunately, I had good supervision because I was at a mental health center. And I remember my supervisor, when I took this back to her, saying, now let's look at the differences. You're Latina, but you're younger. You have a different urban experience. These women are traditional older women that come from a very different place.
So it was a wonderful lesson for you, right out of the box.
Absolutely.
Because you were probably aware of the struggles and the conflicts between the different cultures and the countries they were from, but not aware of the generational conflict between you and them.
Absolutely.
So how did it work out with her?
Well, you know, I think that one of the things I remembered in my training is certainly not to bring my own issues out. So I maintained objectivity, which was very tough because remember I had that feminist streak in me. But we were able to talk about other experiences that some of the other women had had. And some of the women, remarkably enough, had a similar experience, but they handled it a little bit different. So, you know, one woman would say, well, you know, I've told him I cannot get food on the table until 6 o'clock, so it can't be 5 o'clock because I have children to take care of. And they were able to really be of support to each other. And it was important for that group of women because they were all, you know, newly migrated and immigrated from different countries within, I would say they had been in New York City within 3 to 5 years. So they were still adapting to being in a different culture in a different country.
And we'll talk a little bit more about this when we come back.
So in 1975, the United States ranked 3rd in the world in percentage. Must be the new guy. Guess you can say I was with you guys the whole time. New guy.
UCF and the Central Florida Research Park have helped create 41,000 jobs and contributed about $3.3 billion to the regional economy.
3, and that's only new girl.
So if it seems like your company's growing, it probably is. UCF stands for opportunity.
We're talking with Dr. Ana Leon from the UCF School of Social Work. We're talking about Latina women and the problems and the issues they face, and many of them are issues that we all face. But when we're born in this country, unless we really move far away, you don't really deal with that sense of loss, because the world they knew, the culture they knew for generations, and they came here looking for a better life for themselves and their children. There is a sense of what I knew is gone and may never be back again, and that has to be a very, very heavy thing on their hearts.
And you know what's important about that is that we all want to belong. We're all striving for a sense of belonging. So when you have your values and you have your culture and you have your support systems totally disappear, that becomes very challenging, because you have to replace them with something. And it's difficult to replace those because those have been long-term, lifelong support systems and values that you've had. So it takes a while, I think, for people to find replacements if they find those at all.
And especially when we talk about the different divisions in the Hispanic countries, that maybe there's a next door neighbor and maybe she's going through the same thing, but then we find out they may be someone from Puerto Rico next to someone who's from the Dominican Republic, and that's very hard to lose those old ways too.
Absolutely. I think that really, when you think about what really makes us individuals, and you think about family systems, you think about values, you think about belief systems, religion, I mean, that's really the guts of who we are, and it looks very different for every person. And I think that even between somebody from the Dominican Republic and somebody from Cuba, that's going to look different as well.
So is there a way, the great answer is yes, you need to go get help. A lot of these women can't afford it. Is there a way to help people, if you meet someone who's going through this, to help them get through it, to become part of their support system?
I think that a lot of what needs to happen is that we need to first develop some understanding and some compassion for somebody who is different. And it's almost like the best way to do that is to put ourselves in their shoes and imagine that, again, we've been transported to another country and we have to operate within that new country and that new system and new values and belief systems and just cultural norms. I think that beyond that, it's a question of embracing diversity and being sensitive to people who are fearful of speaking because of the differences in the language or the accents. Being, willing to engage people and to make them feel like they do belong, even if they are different, that they can bring something to a situation like a PTA meeting that is different, diverse, and that will enrich that entire experience for everyone. And
being willing to learn about their culture, because in reality our grandparents and great-grandparents went through the same thing.
Yes.
And the truth is the way immigration is in this country, and we're a country, as we said, full of immigrants. The Hispanic people are going to make up an enormous percentage of our population in Florida, perhaps the majority in South Florida already, or very close to that.
And I think in Central Florida, we're also seeing a major influx of Latinos. I mean, especially Puerto Ricans, we're seeing major numbers of Puerto Ricans coming into the Central Florida area. So I don't think we can avoid addressing the issues and finding ways of embracing people from these cultures.
And getting so much out of it.
Absolutely.
The music, the culture, the sense of family, the food. Oh boy, I love them from Miami. I love the food. Let's talk about how deep this goes and how much this can hurt somebody. There's even a word for susto, for the loss of your soul, that the despair can be so deep. This can be very serious for these women.
Yeah, you know, it again goes back to the crux of the matter for them. It is the way they have functioned. It is something that is perceived as a major loss because it's their identity as well, and it's really the identity of their children and their family. So a lot of these women can tend to develop depression as a result of that, and some of it can be very transitional depression, which will, you know, disappear after a while when they become more adjusted and perhaps with some counseling help, and some of it for some women, depending on the individual, may last longer.
There are issues with children of Hispanic families. Sometimes they're lost, and sometimes they're not lost, but their parents are, and that adds to a lot of social problems, the dropout rate, etc. How do you get across to these kids that, yeah, you can embrace both without, and find out a way of being accepted in your family and accepting your new world?
You know, that's a major challenge, I think, for everybody in our society, because it really speaks to how Latinos are depicted in the media, for example. So if we're going to help children to understand that it's okay to be Latino and embrace that culture, not be ashamed of it, and keep that culture as part of who you are while still functioning in an American culture, an American system, then we have to really look at what are we as a society doing? You know, how are Latinos being portrayed in the media? What are our discriminatory beliefs and practices that we see? And I think you can almost see this on a macro level, that we have to address it on a societal level. And then I think individually, it's our responsibility to not make children feel ashamed of who they are. And I've had kids, you know, say to me that they feel very awkward and embarrassed because sometimes they talk a little louder in their families than in other families. So when they go to school, the teacher will say something that will feel to the child very shaming about the volume. And yet that may be part of the culture, you know, because that tends to be part of you know, what Latino families do. If you ever look at a Latino family and you look at a non-Latino family, you'll see major differences in communication patterns and volume and the way conflicts are resolved and how grudges are resolved. I mean, all of that is very unique about Latino families. So we have to help children embrace both and operate within both by letting them know that their own culture is actually a very rich part of who they are, and that there are so many positives to it.
And to look into it yourself. I know at my children's school we do something called Holidays Around the World, and they set up little booths around the school, and there's Christmas, and there's Hanukkah, and there's Ramadan, and there's Diwali, and there's the Chinese New Year. And the first one I went to, I said, how about Three Kings Day? And I remember the teacher saying, what is that? And they had no idea. Mm-hmm. But you know what? It's become a really popular segment. The kids come, we give them instruments, they sing Feliz Navidad, and it was actually shocking to me that with such an enormous Latin population and culture, nobody had ever even heard of it. Nobody knew about it. But once they were open to finding out, they realized it was something that would enrich their lives as well.
I think part of that, Charna, is because there is such a push for assimilating and adapting to the new life. And I think on some level, many Latinos, including myself, are guilty of that, because we want to be accepted, we want to belong, we want to go along with the mainstream, and so we do give up some things along the way. And I think that in the long run, we have to be very careful not to give up some of those very enriching aspects of our culture that make us unique.
Because in reality, some of the things that are so rich in the heritage, the family, involving the extended family, which so many of us don't do anymore because of distance or whatever. It seems like one member of the family, a Hispanic family, moves to one city and then they all follow.
Right.
Or I was talking to a girlfriend, and we have friends who are from Puerto Rico, and no matter what happens, joyful or sad occasion, no matter what the rest of the family members are doing, they will drop everything and come however far it is to that member of the family and be there.
Absolutely.
And that's such an important part that we can learn from.
Right.
And that's something you'll never lose.
No, and you know, I remember that when we moved here from New York City, my husband and I started kidding around because we had 5 years without anybody moving over, and at the 5-year mark, my mother, my father, my parents, and then we had my sister and her family, my brother and his family, and then they were all here, and we started laughing and saying it didn't take them long.
I was thinking, what took them so long?
Right, and actually it did, but we really thought that it would take them even longer than that.
They were just planning.
They were, and it was a surprise.
And is his family here too?
Well, actually, he has sisters here. He has a couple of sisters here, and then his parents had relocated back to Puerto Rico after he went off to college many years ago. Both his parents are deceased. His mother just passed away recently. But he has sisters here, he has an uncle here, cousins, so...
So you blazed the trail, you were the pilgrims, you found the place.
Absolutely.
And then everybody followed. Dr. Ana Leon, thank you so much. This flew by way too fast. We'll have to come back and talk about other things in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Charna Davis-Wiese. Thank you for joining us on UCF in Print, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.